The last season of Pac-12 basketball is off to an exciting start. The next Pac-12 beat reporter, Michelle Smith, is here to talk all things Pac-12 from Utah and UCLA to the conference's hot start and who and what to watch moving forward. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
Good! You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Hello and happy Friday. You are locked on Women's Basketball. I'm host Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. If this is your first time listening to Locked On Women's Basketball, we at The Next have over 100 reported pieces every single month. We have a beat reporter on every single WNBA team, one on more than 15 different NCAA beats, including the two of us. So get that YouTube subscription up, and you can also support us by subscribing to The Next, $9 a month, $72 a year at thenexthoops.com. Today, we'll be chatting all about the Pac-12, including what we've learned about UCLA and Utah in the first week and a half, as well as other teams and players to keep an eye on and non-conference games to add to your calendar. Joining me today is The Next's Pac-12 beat reporter, Michelle Smith. So, Michelle, what statement has the Pac-12 made so far in its last year as we know it?
Pretty big one. With one loss, I think are we still at one loss, or did we pick up a second loss last night? Might have picked up a second loss last night. But just, among the conference teams, the record has been really strong. They've had some really high profile wins. This is a good conference. I think everybody thinks that, it's ironic that it's the last conference season for the Pac-12. It's depressing. We won't start on that again. But it's, we've got a lot of experienced teams who've added some really great pieces, and we've got some exciting freshmen, and it's just been a really, really great start for the Pac-12 so far.
Yeah, and I did double check Arizona State loss, so the Pac-12 is at 2 losses in about a week and a half, which not many conferences can say. And 2 teams that started the week in the top 5 this week were UCLA and Utah. So why don't we dive into them, starting with UCLA. Who have the Bruins played so far, and what have you learned about the team so far?
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about Utah and UCLA because I feel like in many ways they're the top 2 ranked teams in the Pac-12 and the teams that, at least heading into the week, we knew the least about. And I'll go UCLA. I mean, we're going to know UCLA's putting up a lot of points. They have 6 players scoring in double figures. Lauren Betts, the sophomore transfer from Stanford, is, averaging a double-double right now. And they look great, and they haven't quite played anybody yet. And so they're going to play. If they've played so far, they played Purdue. That's a good win. That's a, Power 5 win. UC Riverside Bellarmine. They're going to play Princeton today. And then next week, they've got Connecticut. And we're going to learn some things about UCLA. We're going to learn about, whether that offense, which is really, really key to UCLA, the 2 things that UCLA and Utah have in common right now is they can score. They can score a lot of points on you. They've got a lot of different offensive choices. They've got a lot of go-to players. But we're going to learn much, much more about UCLA next week when they play UConn. We'll learn about them defensively. We'll learn, we're just going to know more about what kind of team they are as one of the, 2 top-ranked teams out of the Pac-12. After that, it's Niagara, Arkansas, Northridge. They'll have another game there. And then they've got 2 more games coming up in December. They've got Florida State and Ohio State back-to-back. So UCLA has a challenging non-conference schedule. It's just more on the back end of the schedule as you get closer to conference play. And I think that we're going to see a lot more and know a lot more about UCLA. But the thing that they have that I think is critical, that a lot of the Pac-12 teams have, is maturity, particularly in that backcourt. Charisma Osborne is a 5th-year senior, and she leads that team with a really steady hand. She's a really consistent player for them. She'll be a WNBA draft pick, and having that kind of maturity at your point guard, I think any coach across the country would love to have that.
And you mentioned the scoring. Who has, started or continued to make a name for themselves early on in this season for the Bruins?
Well, I mean, I think you got to look at Betts right now because she transferred. She was playing behind Cameron Brink at Stanford. Stanford last year when Betts was there had a lot of post players, and Betts was in a rotation. And this year she is a featured post. And so I think Betts is the one that's busting out right now. That's in a way that we were waiting to watch and see. If Betts, given the playing time, would be the player that made her the number one recruit in the country. And right now, they're feeding her. She's averaging 11 rebounds a game. I think she's working on like 19 or so points a game. She's she's doing it for them. So she's a player I think we're going to watch all year and see if, if getting the playing time, if being the person, the go-to player inside is really going to give her a breakthrough season.
And has anything surprised you so far about UCLA, or are you still waiting to see more from them?
I don't have enough information yet. I'm not surprised by anything yet. I think that they're going to be tested, and I think they're going to be tested headed in that run up to a Pac-12 season that's going to test them as well. And so, with UCLA, the thing has always been, we anticipate UCLA being a strong team. And this goes back to the Jordan Canada, Monique Billing days. And then, just Corey Close having really, really strong teams that are really, really, really good, but don't quite get to great. And I want to see if this UCLA team is going to get to great.
And then you mentioned wanting to learn a couple more things about the team and some upcoming games. Is there anything specifically that you're looking for more than just, how the offense or defense responds to teams like UConn?
Well, I want to know how the defense is going to respond to a team like UConn for sure. I want to see how, Kiki Rice in her sophomore season, she was one of the big names that we talked about as a freshman last year. London Jones, who is kind of their sniper off the bench, who comes in and shoots threes. I want to see how they make that sophomore jump. I'm watching that to see what kind of sophomore seasons these two are going to have, because that's also going to be really critical. I mean, this is in a lot of ways a pretty young UCLA team. Betts is a sophomore. Rice is a sophomore. Jones is a sophomore. You've got Osborne as that anchor as the fifth-year senior, but you have a lot of young players on this team. Emily Bessois is a junior. This is a young team still.
And how do you think that may either help or hurt them as the season continues?
Provided everybody grows the way that they look like they're going to continue to grow, I think it's going to serve them well and it's going to set them up well. But I'm not ready yet to sort of see how this knockdown, drag-out Pac-12 season is going to look. I want to know more about some teams, except that I know that it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out Pac-12 season. We were just chatting about how many losses the first-place team in the Pac-12 is going to have by the time they get to the conference tournament. And I think it can be a handful. I think it's going to be it. I don't know that I see anybody running through this conference undefeated. And it's early to talk about conference play, but UCLA's in that mix. So what you want to learn about them is how they respond after a loss. What you want to learn about them is, how they're going to play defense against some of the better offensive teams in the country. And a team like Utah or a team like Connecticut is definitely going to bring that for them.
Yeah, especially, I know this is a Pac-12 episode, but especially after UConn's, I believe, 80-48 win over a top 20 team in Maryland. And, we saw what Stanford did to Maryland as well over the weekend. Or was
Indiana?
It Indiana?
Yeah.
But yeah, just excited to see how that goes moving forward. And coming up next, we'll talk about Utah, another team that had an interesting first week and a half, as well as other teams that made a splash as well. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing my family this holiday season. I know I struggle with the seasonal blues, especially now that the sun is setting before 5 p.m. This time of year can be a lot, and it's normal to feel sadness, anxiety, or both about it. Therapy can serve as something to look forward to, help you feel grounded, and give you some tools to manage the stress and change that the holiday season can bring. Therapy has been incredibly helpful for me. I've learned so many good coping skills, and it's helped me become a better version of myself all year round, but especially during the long, mostly dark months of winter. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, which means it's convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just have to fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you need to change therapists, you can do so at any time at no additional charge. Find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. I love the Game Time app. It's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area, and you can look at the view from every seat in the venue, which I just think is the coolest thing. Game Time is obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. They have deals on tickets right up until the start of an event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. With Zone Deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So, Michelle, moving on to Utah, who have the Utes played so far, and what have you learned about the team so far?
The Utes, Utes got off to a pretty quiet start until they played Baylor on Monday night at Baylor. That's a tough game. And Baylor is one of those teams that we're wondering how good they are. And so we definitely got a sense of that in a win over Utah. So Utah took the Pac-12's first loss and took its first loss in a tough road game. It was a tough environment. Alyssa Peely, who is, it was last year's Pac-12 Player of the Year, is an All-American candidate. She sat a lot of the first half with foul trouble, which told me a lot about how much they rely on Peely. She came out, she scored 22 in the second half. She's a great player, but you can't have your best player on the bench in the first half in a tough non-conference road game. And then, they were playing catch up throughout the game and they just couldn't get over the hump. So I learned, Utah's another team that's going to put up a ton of points. They've got a lot of scores. They've got Gianna Neepkins. They've got Izzy Palmer. Like, they have a lot of things, but, when you've got one of the best players in the country in the center of your offense, and she has to go out because of extended period of foul trouble, that was a struggle for them. It was the first time, they put up like 108 and 104 points in their first couple of games against, some not very tough competition for them. But, they put up 74 against Baylor in a game where, Peely had to sit a lot. So that tells me something. And their schedule moving forward, they've got South Carolina in Uncasville, Connecticut on December the 10th. And so kudos to these teams from South Carolina and UConn, to these Pac-12 teams who are taking on these matchups in the non-conference. It's thrilling for the fans, and it's a great barometer. But South Carolina is going to be tough. And Peely and Cardozo, and it's really just going to be a big, big test for Utah. Who only has a couple of those really in their non-conference schedule.
And you mentioned that Peely had to sit a lot. How do you hope that maybe the team sees that and adjusts that, or any other adjustments to take away from that loss to Baylor?
Well, it's early in the season, and so I think the adjustment mostly, frankly, is on Peely's part. We've watched, for example, Cameron Brink at Stanford spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to stay out of foul trouble with body positioning and things. And Peely's a senior, and she'll figure it out. But it's early in the season, and I don't know. I missed the first half of that game coming home from work, so I don't know if it was if those are fouls that are avoidable, if because she's a big body inside, she's getting called for some things, but avoiding foul trouble is going to be really, really important for them because they're not that deep inside. Peely was the player who came in and gave them a post presence, and she still is their main post presence and their go-to scorer. So she got to stay on the floor.
And then are there any other individual players that have stood out to you, either positively or negatively so far?
Well, Neepkins has been great. Gianna Neepkins, who, looks like, she's just this very young looking with the big bouncy ponytail, and she's just a killer from perimeter. She's just, they call Steph the babyface assassin. I sort of look at Neepkins kind of the same way. She just looks like a really unassuming kid, and then she comes in and she'll just, drill you from three. So I'm really, really impressed with the way that she's playing. But, again, they're putting up until Baylor, they're putting up 100 points a game. And so they're getting scoring from a lot of places. And I'm just really, really interested, again, to see how they sustain that and how that moves into the Pac-12 season. But I thought I learned a little bit more about Utah against Baylor, and we're going to learn some more in a couple weeks.
And before we wrap up this segment, what other teams have stood out to you so far? I know Stanford had that win over Indiana. Anything else?
Yeah, Stanford looks really, really good to me. And maybe even weirdly in a surprising way. Like I was a little bit surprised they started the season ranked 15. I thought that was too low. But Kiki Arioffen has been, the player that they hoped that she would be to start this season. And I hope for Stanford's sake, she keeps it up. Last year, she got off to a really strong start and then sort of dropped off in that post rotation. She just was struggling a little bit with consistency, but she looks great. I would say that I think I'm interested in Colorado obviously had the big marquee win at the start with LSU. And I think that they're just going to be a dangerous team all season. I'm keeping one eye on Oregon State. I think with Tamia Gardner back, with Talia von Oelhoffen, they've got an experienced point guard. Like, I just think that Reagan Beers, who was Pac-12 Freshman of the Year last year, they have an opportunity to make some noise in a way that they haven't in a couple of years. I just don't see that program being held down for super long. I think they had a rough COVID go, and they're trying to, get it back. And I think they're going to be dangerous. And USC, Juju Watkins. Juju's already got a national name. But there are just so many teams. Washington State's going to be good. I think the teams at the bottom of the conference are better. I think Arizona State is better than it was last year. I think Cal is better than it was. Washington, I think Washington is better. I think Oregon is still a question mark. And how much better they'll get. And they've got a couple of really, really good young players, but this conference is going to be crazy.
And, you've covered the Pac-12 for a long time. Is this the best the Pac-12 has looked, maybe top to bottom in a while?
Yeah, yes. I think that the ability to have fifth-year seniors playing their fifth year of college basketball has a lot to do with that. A lot of kids came back to the Pac-12 and they stayed one more year. There are a lot of kids doing one more year. I think Arizona's got two, as Mary Martinez and Helena Puello. You've got Osborne. You've got Hannah Jump at Stanford. You've got, Jalen Sherrod and Quay Miller. A lot of kids decided to take that fifth year. And I think that really elevates a lot of teams in the conference when those players have that opportunity. So, yeah, I think this is as good. I think this is as good a season at the right time that I've seen for the Pac in a while. And I think those fifth years have a lot to do with it.
Coming up next, we'll talk about what players to watch and other non-conference games to watch as the season continues to unfold. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. PrizePicks offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday each Tuesday. PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. With the NBA season here and the NFL season in full swing, I'm now really excited to pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. So we've talked about a lot of players so far, but are there some players to watch for you as the season continues?
Yeah, I want to watch. I really want to see Colorado and how their follow-up is to the big LSU win. I want to watch, a player like Frida Foreman, and who's such a dangerous perimeter player, and Aaronette Vonleh, Nettie they call her, and she had a great game against LSU, and I really, really want to see how she continues to develop. I'm keeping an eye on Tamia Gardner at Oregon State. She was the top recruit in program history. She had some issues with blood clots last season, and she had to sit out the non-conference, and she got off to a slow start as she got her conditioning back. But she has the potential to be a game changer for Oregon State. I'm going to keep an eye on LA. I mean, I think, we've got, Watkins, and you've got Aaliyah down there who's recovering, who's back on the floor now after that nationally known story about all of the gunshots and that she took in a house party in Las Vegas, and she's playing again. It's just, I think there's a lot of really, really good stories around the Pac-12, and just so many good teams. I'm going to watch Washington State. Clarice Ledger-Walker has been, they won the Pac-12 tournament last year for the first time ever, and Bella Muricatete is one of those fifth-year players who came back, and she's playing alongside Ledger-Walker again. And what's Washington State going to do? And Oregon State and Washington State are in this position, right? Like, they're the two left behind teams in the pack, and their future is still being worked out in court. And, how are they going to move forward as programs, and how do they maximize their visibility to recruits this season by having really, really good seasons when recruits are not sure where they're going to be playing next year? So I think these are really important seasons in particular for Oregon State and Washington State and the future of their programs.
And I know you wrote about this, but for people that maybe haven't checked out your Pac-12 non-conference games to watch story, what upcoming games should people put on their calendar?
Well, and not all of them. I mean, we've got some big ones coming up, but, we're hitting that Thanksgiving. Now we're hitting that Thanksgiving window. So, so next week, we've got Washington State against Maryland in Cancun. That's going to be a great game. I mean, it's hard because some of these games we don't get to see when they go far away, but that's going to be a really, really good game. Arizona State, they're building, and they're going to play Texas, and they're going to play Texas in the Virgin Islands. I'm really watching, for example, in particular, some of these matchups that we're going to get over that Thanksgiving break. I'm checking the schedule. UConn and UCLA is actually not one of those tournament games, which is interesting. But NC State and Colorado on Saturday, the November 25th. That's going to be another opportunity for Colorado to show itself against a team that just beat UConn. So there's going to be a lot of good games coming up. I'm running that schedule down to see which ones are hopping out at me over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, we've still got games. Stanford is still going to play. I think Stanford still has Ohio State on the schedule. I think we've got, I'm bummed that there's no Tennessee Stanford on the schedule this year for the first year in a long time. But we've got some good games. Oregon's going to play Baylor in early December. Stanford's going to go to Gonzaga. Gonzaga's showing itself to be a good team. Like, there's just a lot of really good matchups here now that you've got a lot of good teams and you really want to see what they're about.
And, this is a broad question intentionally, but what are you excited to see the rest of this season? I know you have a lot of feelings about the last Pac-12 season, but what are you excited about?
I'm excited that teams are so put together and playing so well. I'm excited about the big wins. 10 or 15 years ago, the Pac-12 would play these games and they might win like half of them. And you would say, okay, what do I make of that? And then the Pac-12's ascension. And ironically, due to honestly the exposure of the Pac-12 network. I mean, it's so ironic that network has been such an albatross for the conference, but such a boon for women's basketball in the conference. And I know even Natalie, you were telling me before we went on that it's hard to watch games, but on the West Coast, the number of West Coast kids that have stayed home because of the exposure that they get and for their families and things on the Pac-12 network. So I'm just excited to see people play well. I want to just remind everybody, Tara's down to 14 wins before she ties Mike Krzyzewski as the sports all-time winningest coach, not just women's basketball's all-time winningest coach. So there's going to be a huge milestone period for Tara, probably early in the Pac-12 season. Another milestone for Tara because she just keeps cranking them out. So there's a lot of things I'm excited about, but it's so bittersweet. And I got to get out of my feelings about it at some point, but I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon. It's just so bittersweet because this is such a good conference and these teams have been together. And to imagine that UCLA and Arizona aren't going to play every year, and to imagine like some of these rivalries and some of these matchups that they're going to go away unless people decide to play each other in the non-conference. But I think there are a lot of feelings to be worked out among all those programs as well about how they all ended up in this, how they all ended up in far-flung places across the country. So I'm just excited to watch the quality of play. I want to watch the young players. I want to see what Lauren Betts does and Juju Watkins does and some of these freshmen that have come in and what they're going to do. But it's still bittersweet.
Thank you for joining me today, Michelle. I always learn so much from you, especially as you mentioned, because it's hard for me to watch some of those Pac-12 games that are on the Pac-12 network. But where can people find you and your work?
Yep, you can find me on the Next, doing Pac-12 work. I've got hopefully another story coming up this weekend. I got to get to work on it. And then on Twitter, or X, I guess we call it now. I'm going to rebel though. I'm still on Twitter. Sorry, X, at MaxSmith413, which is the handle's right down there. And yeah, so just, keep following the pack, but I think they're going to make it easy for us to keep paying attention.
Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. And also make sure to tune back in to Locked On Women's Basketball tomorrow so our draft experts, Em Hunter and Lincoln, can recap their WNBA retrospect series. And I'm really excited about that as well.